What's the best way to master and understand a new scale? It's easy. You gotta take it to the drone zone. Well, hey there kids, it's your good buddy, Uncle Ben. In my opinion, one of the biggest mistakes that guitar players make is learning a new scale and practicing it in a void without any kind of accompaniment. Whenever our minds hear a scale, they first hear the root note, and then they hear every other note in the scale in terms of its relationship to that root. The problem is for most guitar players is, especially if it's like a new scale pattern that you're learning, and you're really trying to think about the shape of it and what fret numbers you're playing and stuff like that, a lot of times by the time you get further up in the scale, your mind has kind of lost track of what that root note was to begin with and what all those other notes mean to it. But instead, if I was to conjure up an A drone and practice that A melodic minor scale against it, like this, I can hear those notes and their relationship to the root much better and understand that scale more easier. So to help you guys out in your quest for scalar dominance, I've just uploaded a ton of different drone tracks over on my Patreon page, patreon.com/Ben Eller Guitars. I've made awesome, super long drone tracks of all 12 root notes, as well as those 12 root notes with a major tonality and those 12 root notes with a minor tonality, for a total of 36 drone tracks for all your scalar needs. And you can gain access to those as well as a ton of awesome backing tracks, bonus lessons, and so much more, even for the low cost of just $1 a month. So be sure to click the Patreon link in the video description below and sign up today. Thanks. Practicing scales this way, instead of just sitting down in front of your metronome or putting on a jam track or something, is a really great way to learn them, because it takes away that obligation and pressure to play in time and maybe even play at an uncomfortable tempo for yourself while following chord changes, while also trying to remember the pattern for a scale or something like that. Because these drones don't have any kind of discernible rhythm or whatever, you can just play at your own pace and think about that scale pattern or whatever it is that you're working on, and go at a speed that suits you rather than being strapped down to a drum track or something. Whenever you're playing free time over a drone like that, you're just going to be able to sit back and relax and understand the sound or flavor that particular scale has. Another great thing about practicing with a drone is that it discourages what I call joyriding. In other words, just meandering up and down a scale, stopping on whatever note, feels good or your brain might recognize as somehow significant or something. Like, I remember the first time that I learned an A minor scale, 3 notes per string, I thought that this note was somehow significant because it was like the finish line of the scale, right? That one must be important. But if I was to practice that same scale with an A minor drone track going behind it, I'd be able to hear that this note right here isn't really all that significant at all. It was just kind of the last note in that pattern as a matter of coincidence, but it doesn't really matter much. You can hear that note isn't like out of key or anything like that, but it just doesn't sound very important. So an A minor chord is made out of 3 notes, A, C, and E. Those are the 3 notes contained inside of an A minor chord. So whenever I got up to the top of the scale pattern right there and I reached that oh so significant finish line, if you stop and think about it, that's a D note. The reason that doesn't sound very resolved is because that's not a note that's in that chord. Whereas meanwhile, its next door neighbor here, the C note, sounds much better with the chord, but I wouldn't know that if I wasn't playing over a chord. Whenever I practice that scale over that A minor chord, my ears and hands are just kind of like compelled to resolve, you know? Ending up here isn't good enough. My ears want to hear it resolve and come to a conclusion. And what you'll find as you practice your A minor scale over that A minor drone is that any of those notes that are in the chord, A, C, or E, feel like good conclusions to licks. There's the A, there's the E, there's the C note. And as you play through that scale, you'll also hear all the other non-chord tones and what they sound like and how they contribute to the character of that scale. For example, you might find that you really like the sound of that second or ninth in the scale, the B note right here. To me, that has a very like almost there kind of sound to it. Your ear really wants it to resolve. But then you learn that that's the note that you hit if you want that kind of sense of longing before you resolve a phrase. Practicing this way will also help you learn to hear the melodic possibilities that are hiding inside of regular old chords. Like for example, when I first started playing guitar, if I heard a C major chord, the only thing that really came to mind was a C major scale, just a regular do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, cheese pizza sound. Let's say I took that same C major drone and practiced a C lydian scale over it. Maybe I could learn to appreciate the sound and character that that scale has and learn to hear that as a possibility every time I'm presented with a plain Jane C major chord during a jam or something. I can play that C lydian scale over that C major chord because a C lydian scale has the notes that create that chord. A C major chord is the notes C, E, and G, or the intervals of root, major, third, and fifth. A C lydian scale contains those things, root, third, fifth, or C, E, G if you're a notes kind of person, as well as a bunch of other really interesting stuff, like this sharp 4 interval, the major 7, and all the other cool stuff about the Lydian scale that makes Steve Vai's big toe shoot up in his boot. I've noticed a lot of times that guitar players that are new to scales and modes oftentimes misinterpret those magical notes that make the modes sound the way that they do as being wrong. It's like our mind automatically wants to make every major type scale the major scale and every minor type scale the minor scale. So whenever somebody's learning like a G mixolydian scale, for example, they hear that note and think it was a dud and instead want to correct it to make it just like a regular old major scale. But that flat 7 is what makes the mixolydian scale sound like itself. And again, if I was to practice that over its accompanying chord, the G major, I could learn to love that flat 7 for being the funky little bastard that it is. I remember the first time that I tried learning the melodic minor scale, for example. That was one that like my ears just couldn't wrap themselves around, especially as I got deeper and deeper into the scale. I just couldn't hear how that was any kind of functional scale that anybody could use until I heard it being used over a drone of a, in this case, B minor chord. It's only then that I learned to enjoy that thing as the official film noir scale. Again, it really just helps you learn the relationship between a chord and a scale. So you can take any of those major backing tracks on the Patreon page and play any of your major type scales over them. Obviously the major scale or ionian mode, the lydian mode, the mixolydian mode, even wacky stuff like a phrygian dominant scale works there, because a phrygian dominant scale has everything you need to create a major chord. Check it out. You could take any of those minor chord drone tracks and practice any scale that generates a minor chord, like your minor scale or natural minor scale or aeolian mode if you're a fancy pants, the Dorian scale, the Phrygian scale, harmonic minor, melodic minor, as well as your minor pentatonics. And let's talk about those. Okay, we all know the drill. You're supposed to learn the 5 minor pentatonic shapes, right? These are all 5 of them in A. And what I see from a lot of players is that they learn those boxes and they practice them diligently and stuff like that. And then they find that they can just play better in the really comfortable, familiar ones, like the A minor pentatonic, root position shape right there. They can play in those better than others, and they mistakenly start thinking that like the 3rd and 4th position aren't really usable. And that's mainly because people practice these outside the context of harmony and end up doing that joyriding thing I was talking about earlier and landing on notes that don't really matter to the chord. So for example, if I was jamming over A minor and I was using my A minor pentatonic scale, it's really easy to stay inside of that first position and just kind of accidentally sound cool because the root notes, A, happen to fall as like a nice little finish line a couple times there in the scale. There's one, tons of licks live right there, right? And there's another root note. So it's really easy to accidentally sound good in that thing. But if you play like, let's say the 3rd position, doesn't really sound as cool, right? Because that scale pattern right there starts off on a D note. And just like we talked about earlier, D is not a part of an A minor chord. It's not a bad note per se, it just doesn't have that nice strong resolution to it. So if you're playing around inside of this 3rd box over your A minor drone chord, you might want to try listening for the notes in there that really resolve very well. You might notice that the E note here sounds solid, again, because it's in the chord, right? There's your root note A. There's that sassy flat 3rd, the C note. There's another E note. Again, that one sounds solid. There's an A, that sounds great. And there's an E note right there that sounds really good. Now, even if you're not like super hip on the note names and stuff like that, if you don't know the board all that well, it's okay. You can use your ears here to tell you which notes sound great. If I was playing through the 5th position box, you can totally let your ears be your guide and tell you what notes here sound great. Yeah. Nah. Good one? Not so much. Solid? Good? Yeah. Nah. Yes. So if you learn where the real money notes are in all 5 positions like that, you're always sure to land on your feet whenever you're ripping through your favorite licks. And speaking of the minor pentatonic scale, this also brings up another really great point about practicing with a drone. It can help you get your bends in tune. See, if you're practicing like a sexy minor pentatonic kind of bluesy lick by yourself, you might be able to convince yourself that that last bend that you did was in tune, right? It's close enough according to a lot of players' ears. So you practice that over and over, and you start to develop the muscle memory and the habit of doing that bend just like that. But the minute you get into a band situation and you start jamming and you notice that, whoops, you've been programming that bend out of tune the entire time, and you didn't even know it. But if you're practicing that same lick with your A drone track going behind you, you'd be able to really hear where you're getting that bend in tune, or not. Guitar players are usually pretty bad about only practicing in a handful of keys, what I call the letter keys, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. But obviously there's a lot more to music than those 7 keys. So you can use a drone of, like, let's say an unfamiliar or problematic note like A flat, and use that to practice all your various positions of your A flat major scale across the neck. No joyriding. I've noticed that a lot of times whenever you put guitar players in uncomfortable or unfamiliar keys like A flat, a lot of times they'll play the wrong notes just entirely out of physical habit and not even hear that they're hitting a bad note. It's like they're listening with their fingers and their eyes rather than their ears. But if you're playing that A flat major scale over an A flat major drone and you hit a bad note, it's really obvious. And the cool thing is too, because these drone tracks are entirely rhythmless, you can always put on your metronome or a drum track or something like that over the top of them whenever you're practicing new scales or licks or sequences or whatever. That way not only do you get the rhythmic benefit of practicing with a click, but you also get the melodic benefit of hearing what that scale sounds like in context. Sure is a lot more interesting than just listening to the monotone click of your metronome as you play up and down some cool melodic idea. And that's just a few of the benefits that you can add to your playing and your vocabulary if you practice scales with a drone instead of all by themselves. It's more funner, it's more better, and more interestinger. And it really helps your ears learn to hear those relationships between a chord and a scale that you can play over it, and all the possibilities that you could play over a boring old major or minor chord instead, and what all the cool intervals that are inside of those scales can add to your sound. Every scale that you learn is like another color that you add to your musical palette, and the more that you explore them and get to know their sounds, especially if you're using these drone tracks, the better you're going to do at painting the tonal landscape of your dreams. Maybe even put some happy little trees in there. Maybe even a happy little squirrel. So be sure to head on over to my Patreon page at patreon.com/Ben Eller Guitars and download all 36 of those drone tracks. 12 of them are just a single root note. 12 of them are all the root notes with major chords. 12 of them are all the root notes with minor chords attached to them. That way you can practice all the different scales and modes and learn them inside and out. You can snag all those even for just $1 a month, so don't delay. Join today. Thank you guys as always for watching. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel for new content coming at you every single week, and ring the bell for notifications every time I upload a new slice of fried gold. And be sure to go grab those tracks off the Patreon page and get to work. Less clicking, more picking.